This story happened to our family in 2007. My name is Emily, and at the time I was living with my parents and my two brothers. We had a big house, but I wouldn't say we were rich. The house was passed down to us from my grandmother, who had received it a long time ago. We moved into it after we said goodbye to her. She had lived there alone for almost 20 years. She had 3 husbands, all of whom had passed away long ago. Our grandmother left us the house in her will, even though she had another daughter. That part doesn't matter. What does matter is that the house always gave me negative feelings. I never liked being there. There were so many rooms no one ever lived in, and that really scared me as a child. When we moved into the house, I chose the room at the end of the hallway, the very last door. It felt much cozier and safer to me than the room near the stairs or the bathroom. My brothers stayed in the room to the right of mine, and across from my door there was another bathroom. My parents' room was right next to the staircase leading down to the first floor. The first night, I didn't sleep in my own room. I stayed with my brothers. It made me feel safer since I wasn't used to the new place yet. The next morning I went to wash up, but the bathroom was occupied by my dad, so I decided to go to the one across from my room. I never liked that bathroom, but I didn't have a choice. Inside there was a terrible smell. Mold and rust mixed together into something truly disgusting. I washed my face, and as I was drying it with a towel, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like something was scratching inside the wall. Maybe it was a rat. I stepped out and called for my dad. He listened more carefully, but didn't hear anything. He thought I was either making it up or had just heard a rat, but that sound didn't resemble a rat at all. The whole day passed, and I had already forgotten about it. But that evening, I went back to the bathroom again. I needed to grab some wet wipes from the cabinet. I opened the door and caught a strange scent, as if someone had just been there, a smell of hand soap. I took the wipes and left. My parents, brothers, and I stayed up late watching a TV series together. I ended up falling asleep right there on the couch. I woke up in the middle of the night, confused about where I was. I got up and decided not to wake my brothers, who were probably already asleep. I went to my own room and decided to spend the rest of the night there. I fell asleep quickly, and I don't even remember what I dreamed about that night. But I woke up in the middle of the night to some kind of noise. I just lay there listening. Maybe it was one of my parents getting up to use the bathroom, or maybe my brothers. But the strange noises, some knocking, some scraping, continued. I got up and went to the door. I accidentally stepped on my bag, the one with my travel mug inside. It made a loud sound, and at that exact moment, everything went silent. I froze in place. Then I heard footsteps. Someone stopped right outside my door. I stepped back and hid behind my bed. I didn't hear anything else after that, but fear completely took over me. Someone turned the doorknob, about to open the door. I stayed there for about 5 minutes, until I realized that no one had come into the room. I got up and slowly approached the door. The hallway was empty. I thought maybe I had overreacted, probably just mom or dad checking to see if I was asleep. I got back into bed and quickly drifted into a deep sleep. In the morning, I got up and washed my face in the bathroom. I went downstairs and asked my dad which one of them had come into my room during the night. Their answer completely shocked me. He said no one had been walking down the hallway that night. My brothers also said they hadn't woken up and hadn't heard anything. At that moment, I started to feel very uneasy, but I still tried to explain it logically. I didn't believe my brothers. Maybe they were just trying to mess with me. The whole day I felt nervous and dreaded the night coming. I felt very uncomfortable in that house. I decided to stay in my room on purpose, to face this feeling once and for all. That evening before bed, I washed up and went to sleep. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, just lying there in bed. But by midnight, I was finally asleep. At that time, something very strange was happening in the bathroom next to my room. I woke up and listened. Someone was definitely in there. I was too scared to step into the hallway, but I did it anyway. I walked slowly and silently down the corridor, wanting to be sure and find out who was in the bathroom. I didn't have the courage to just open the door and look. Instead, I went to my parents' bedroom and slightly opened the door. Mom and Dad were both sound asleep. That meant it had to be one of my brothers playing a prank on me. I opened their bedroom door, and to my surprise, they were both sleeping in their beds. I stepped back, confused, not understanding what was happening. There was definitely someone in the bathroom. Then everything went silent. I turned my head to the right and saw a dark silhouette of a man standing at the end of the hallway. I froze in fear and screamed. I ran into my parents' room and woke them up. Dad grabbed a vase and went into the hallway, but there was no one there. At first, they didn't believe me. They thought I had just had a nightmare. But then Dad decided to check the bathroom. That's when he noticed a hole in the wall behind the sink, a small passage. It led directly into the basement of the house. At that moment, I started crying, realizing that someone had been living close to me and using my toiletries. He had been using my soap and touching my towel, and the night before, he had tried to come into my room. I nearly lost my mind from those thoughts. There was no one in the basement. The police were never able to figure out what had happened, but I never heard any strange noises again, and from then on, my bedroom door was always locked. My name is Justin. I recently moved into a new apartment in a small town. I won't mention my address or the name of the town because I don't want any trouble, but I'll tell you what it was like living there. We've all probably had neighbors we didn't even want to say hello to. I had just moved into my new apartment, and to be honest, I'm an introvert who doesn't like talking to people. So when I moved into my unit on the second floor of a small apartment building, I didn't try to meet all the neighbors. Within a week, I already knew that a young couple with a child lived on the first floor, an elderly woman, and a single man who almost never left his home. On the second floor, there was me, a woman with 2 cats, and one apartment that seemed completely empty. At least I had never once seen anyone open that front door. If I were more outgoing, I probably would have learned more about that apartment from the other neighbors, but I didn't care. Until one day I saw a delivery driver. I ran into the courier in the stairwell and was surprised to see him knocking on the door that I'd never seen open. At first, I thought he had the wrong address, but no. The door opened, and the courier handed over the order. I didn't see the tenant of that apartment. I only saw a hand, but that really caught me off guard. Before that, I was sure no one lived there. I went back inside and got on with my daily routine. Had dinner, did the dishes, and sat down on the couch. I just opened TikTok and started watching short videos. About an hour and a half passed, and then I heard the loud slam of a door and some voices coming from outside my front door. Who's talking so loudly out there? I thought. I walked up to the door. Damn, my heart almost stopped. It was a paramedic. An EMT asked me if I knew who lived in the apartment to the right of mine. I told him I didn't know. I saw them carry a woman out of that apartment on a stretcher. She looked awful, like something was seriously wrong. I closed the door and thought to myself that whatever had happened, it was probably her own fault. I went to my room to go to sleep. I had a job interview in the morning. I lay down on my bed and fell asleep. I clearly remember dreaming that I was driving a car, but in real life, I didn't even have a license. I woke up in the middle of the night and decided to get a glass of water. I turned on the faucet and filled the glass. That's when I heard something happening in the stairwell. Some strange sound, like someone was scratching. I slowly walked up to the front door and pressed my ear against it to listen. What is that noise? I didn't have a peephole, so I couldn't see what was going on outside. I just stood there, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It wasn't loud, probably not loud enough to wake anyone else. I got tired of standing like that and accidentally leaned on the door with my hand. At that exact moment, the sound stopped. Maybe it was a rat? I waited a little longer and then turned the lock. I slowly opened the door. She was standing there. That same woman was standing in front of the door to her apartment. I thought maybe she couldn't get it open. I asked, "Do you need help?" She just stood there with her back to me, silent. I asked again, "Do you need help?" At that moment, she slowly turned her head toward me and looked me straight in the eyes. She stood there, staring at me with a look I will never forget. I decided to close the door. It was incredibly creepy. I completely forgot about the glass of water and went straight to the bedroom. I sat on the bed, unsure what to do. Should I call an ambulance again? My head was full of thoughts, and that terrifying image of the woman. I couldn't get her out of my mind. I laid down and tried to sleep. That night, I had a horrifying dream, and I heard a woman screaming. Damn, it was such an unsettling night. But the scariest part was still ahead. I woke up feeling terrible, like I hadn't slept at all. I had a pounding headache. I ate a quick breakfast and started getting ready for my interview. Suddenly, I heard a noise out in the stairwell. I opened the door and saw a police officer. The door to the apartment across from mine was wide open. I was in shock. There was red liquid all over the floor. It was blood. I asked the officer what had happened, though it was already obvious. They carried out a black bag. I remembered my dream. What if that scream I heard was real? What if it was her scream? I'll never know for sure, but I was overwhelmed by a deep sense of guilt. What if I could have helped her? Hi everyone, my name is Lucas. A few years ago I moved to the United States. My move is an interesting story, but today I want to talk about how I rented a house in a quiet part of the city. The house belonged to a woman who, because of her job, was forced to live in another area. It was a middle-class house, and it was clean, although it was clear that some rooms needed renovation. There's really nothing to say about the first few days. Everything was normal, even boring. I just lived there, worked from home, and occasionally went for a walk. I even thought about buying a bicycle because I had just arrived and wanted to see all the places in the city. One day, as usual, I went out for a walk, and in the evening, as I was returning home, I met my neighbor. It was the first time I had seen him. I approached to say hello and introduce myself, but he looked very tense. He didn't respond to my greeting at all. He gave me a disgusted look and went inside his house. He looked about 50 years old, slightly overweight, and, what was most strange, he was walking across the lawn in heeled boots. He was also wearing a baseball cap and had a surgical mask under his chin. Overall, he looked strange, and I realized we were not going to be friends. That evening, I had the night off, and I decided to invite another neighbor over. I had met him a couple of days earlier. His house was not far from mine. He came with his girlfriend, and we had a great time. I decided to ask him if he knew my neighbor who lived to the right. Tom said that everyone around knew about that man, but no one was friends with him. Many people thought he was mentally unstable. We stayed up until midnight, and I decided to walk them home. At the same time, I got a chance to take a walk and get some fresh air. We said goodbye, and I headed back home. Halfway there, I noticed someone was walking behind me. I'm a very anxious person, and I realized almost immediately that this person was following me and keeping pace. I didn't turn around to look. I hoped we were just going the same way. But when I reached my house, I realized I no longer heard footsteps. I turned around and saw my creepy neighbor. I could hear the clicking of his heeled boots, and he was wearing his surgical mask again. He was standing near the road, about 50 meters away from me, looking in my direction. I asked him what he wanted, but he didn't answer. He just turned around and walked back toward his house. It was very strange. I went inside and straight to my bedroom. I needed to sleep. I had to wake up early. I work from home on my MacBook. I forgot to mention that I'm a designer at a company, but I couldn't fall asleep right away. I kept thinking about what that man wanted from me. In the morning, I made cookies, the kind my mom taught me to bake, and I decided to try and make peace with my creepy and strange neighbor. I left my house and walked over to his. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I knocked again, but still silence. Maybe he wasn't home, or was still asleep. I decided to peek through the window. My curiosity wouldn't let me leave it alone. I stepped onto the lawn and walked up to the window. The house was very dirty, and even the window itself was covered in grime. In the living room, there was an old TV and a radio, one armchair and a small table, a bookshelf with no books on it. I stood there staring into someone else's house when I suddenly noticed the front door slightly open, and that man was looking right at me. I got scared. He just stood there, staring. I apologized and said I only wanted to offer him some cookies, but he immediately closed the door. I instantly noticed a rotten smell coming from the house, or maybe it was the man himself. I went home, completely confused. I thought it was time to just forget about him and get back to work. The day went by as usual. In the evening, I got up from my desk and went to the kitchen to make something to eat when I suddenly heard a knock. It was coming from outside. I looked out the window and didn't see anything strange. Then I stepped outside and looked around. It was already dark, and there was only one house with no lights on. Of course, it was my neighbor's house, and it seemed like the noise was coming from there too. I grabbed my jacket and headed over. I was really curious about what was going on. As I got closer, I noticed that the front door was slightly open again. I know I'm not supposed to go inside, so I just walked a little closer to try and hear what was happening. It sounded like someone was hammering something. What worried me most was why there were no lights on in the house. I stood there for a couple of minutes and then went back home. I made dinner and had already forgotten about my strange neighbor. I went to my bedroom and planned to just lie down and watch some YouTube videos. I didn't even notice when I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by a strange and loud noise. I woke up and didn't understand what had just happened. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes. That's when I realized I think I hear footsteps. Loud footsteps. I don't have any relatives or friends here. Someone had broken into my house. I immediately wanted to grab my phone to call the police, but I had left it in the living room. I was in a bad situation and needed to do something. I got up and slowly walked to the door of my room. I closed it and started listening. Maybe it was a burglar. I kept thinking about what I would do if he came closer. I picked up a heavy jewelry box and waited. But the footsteps were gone. Everything went silent. Just in case, I stayed in the room for another half hour. Then I decided to come out and check the house. Everything looked normal. Nothing was stolen. Even my watch was still sitting on the shelf. I started to think maybe it was some kind of auditory hallucination and began to calm down. I walked over to the window and looked outside, and that's when I noticed something strange. The light was on in my strange neighbor's house. A wave of anxiety hit me, as if I already knew exactly who had broken into my house. Then I remembered the sound his heeled boots made, and everything clicked. I was sure it was him. I stared at his house, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't bring myself to call the police, and in the end, I didn't. In the morning, I called the woman I had rented the house from and told her I couldn't stay there. I asked her to return my deposit and left for a motel. I don't know if that man was insane or something even worse, but I didn't want to find out. Maybe I made the wrong decision, but I never went back to that neighborhood again.